Hello, and welcome to the Drone Network, the only podcast in the air and on the airwaves. I am your host, Bryce Blade, and on this show, we document the tech, economics, and people piloting the world's largest standardized drone imagery network. Each episode, we explore how drones are reshaping industries, creating new economic opportunities, and literally changing how we see the world. On today's episode, I have Dylan Gorman. Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Appreciate your time today.
Appreciate you. Dylan, how do you introduce yourself to people? How do you describe what you do for a living?
My usual elevator pitch is that I've been in this space for actually coming up on 12 years now, and I've done everything from provide the services, do the training, do the R&D. So I would consider myself an aerial intelligence expert, right? Because what we're doing is providing intelligent data to all kinds of customers. So not just real estate marketing or any of the other stuff, real aerial intelligence expert within the industry. That's kind of how I position myself.
That's a hell of a title. I wish I had something as impressive sounding, but that's real good. Let's put that in context for folks. You've done over 5,000 missions.
Yeah, I need to update that.
Yeah, where are you at now?
I think I'm breaching about 7,500 now at this point.
7,500. So you've really, I was going to say doubled that. That's not how math works. Excuse me, I have a BFA. But that's a really impressive uptick. How long has that taken you?
Majority of that 5,000 of the 7,500 happened in a span of a year and 8 months. But that was a few years ago. So since then, I mean, I've been all over the place providing aerial intelligence to all kinds of clients, whether it's doing surveying and mapping, working with engineering and surveying firms, or working with companies that are looking to stand up their own drone company, or not just drone company, but drone service, for their own internal use cases. So that has just quickly gone up in the ticker count for what I've been able to provide for clients, individuals, organizations. There's really no single parallel that this operates within. It's all over the board.
That's a lot. I mean, you're obviously an experienced commercial pilot. You have over a decade of experience. You've almost doubled what I thought was your original 5,000th flight mission since I've started talking to you. You've got some incredible experience in drone photogrammetry. I believe you've sold a drone business. I'm going to ask you about that in a little bit. You share a lot of what you know as a drone operator, and you're a prominent LiDAR content creator. You are on YouTube. You have thousands of followers. You have partnerships with hardware companies. That's, again, a lot, non-derogatory. But what I'm really curious is what that volume of experience has taught you that perhaps no other course such as yours can, or perhaps only that your course can, depending on how you want to frame that.
No, I never want to claim that I am the sole expert within this space, because there are plenty of prominent figures that exist in this space. There are people that have been here way before I have been, and there are people that are coming into this space that bring a wealth of knowledge. I always try and consider myself, at the top of the game, but that's because I continue to educate myself on the tools, whether it's both the hardware, the software, the different regulations that exist. And, given that most of my work is done within North America, I still do things globally as well, whether that's doing the consulting, the research and development. So I have to be in the bleeding edge as much as I can and surround myself with as much knowledge as possible. And my greatest strength is being able to share that knowledge to the wealth of individuals that follow not just me on my social medias, but also in person too. I consult with a lot of companies on aiming and basically pointing them the right direction that they need to go in, depending on what it is that they're trying to achieve. Because regardless of whether you started in the drone industry like I did almost 12 years ago at this point, or you're starting today, there's still so much that is happening and so many different applications that exist to it that there's not going to be one sole source of truth. You have to do your due diligence, as I say this a lot, and anybody that listens to me knows that's my favorite word to use, but it's true. I mean, you can't just go in blind and expect, excellent results. There's a lot of trial and error that exists, and there's a lot of technology that I think exists now today that just makes it so much easier, but there's still an application of the knowledge, whether it's both on the hardware and the software or individually themselves.
Diligence is such a good two-word answer to a lot of these questions. But something else I'd be curious, as somebody who is, to put it simply, a lot less experienced than you, maybe I was going to say 1/10, take a tenth of that tenth, and we'll start to get closer. But what's the most common or the biggest mistake you see people make when they try to go from hobbyist interested in drones to somebody commercial or professional with them.
It's actually funny that you bring that up. I'm working on something in the background right now that is actually going to address this single problem that almost every single operator has. Because at the end of the day, everyone puts themselves in the position as an operator and not a business owner. And given that this is a service-based industry, it doesn't matter if you're a hobbyist going to professional or if you work for an organization or an engineering or a surveying firm or really any part of this industry that is providing services, you still need to understand what the client's wants and needs are. And that's being a business professional. It has really nothing to do with the hardware and the software that you use. Those are just the tools that allow you to be a successful business or entrepreneur within this space. The single biggest mistake is people invest way too much time and effort into the tools, which those are important, right? But we can't kid ourselves and say, oh, well, why wouldn't we spend, the right money on the right tool for the right applications? But a lot of people forget to spend the time, effort, and really energy that it takes to build those relationships, whether it's a one-on-one or whether it's on an organization base. Because by building those relationships, you really got to understand the core problem or core problems that these companies or individuals are facing. And if you're able to come in with a service that's able to provide a viable, cost-effective solution to them, then you've won their business. It doesn't matter if it's one job or 100 jobs, and everything else in between kind of falls in line with that. So to kind of sum this all up, the biggest mistake most people make is not developing the relationship side of this industry. Yes, the tools, the education, and the application of the data or application of the service is just as important, but you can't have that if you don't have anything or anyone to sell to.
Absolutely. You hit on a lot of great points there. I am somebody who, with a lot of interests, let's say, and interests I've tried to monetize, I've definitely fallen into the tool trap, whether it's photography or even drawing, to be honest. The idea that this pencil will make me better, this lens is what's missing from my kit, this is what'll elevate me. Part of what made me so interested when you said how important it is to you and what you do with your business and the services you provide to be on the cutting edge, whereas probably the advice I'd give a lot of people trying to make that transition is to avoid the cutting edge a lot of the time. And for that reason, it's, I think, much the same logic as once you're a master at something, you can learn how to break the rules. I think it makes a lot of sense for somebody with a dozen years of experience to be particularly interested in what's emerging, what's next, versus somebody who's getting started and is looking at that horizon for the answer, whereas there's probably an established answer for them. But you also hit on, to put it another way, the business side of running a business. And it's the single most common mistake I see people make. And in another life, I worked for the Freelancers Union. I ran a site called Clients from Hell. And I've been largely self-employed my entire life. And it is funny to me that, like, the reality is, again, regardless of craft, being good at the craft itself is maybe even less than half of it. I'd bring it down to maybe a third. What you said, being able to sell your services, is probably closer to half in my mind. I think there are 3 reasons people work with anyone trying to establish themselves in a commercial venture. They do good work, they're good to work with, or they deliver as promised. And you'll notice do good work, whether it's being a great drone pilot or not, just 1/3 of that pie. But I've been doing enough talking. I'm here to talk to you. Let's talk about your drone business. I want to talk about the one you actually sold. What was that? And what did you learn about the industry that you didn't know before?
Yeah, no, that was back during COVID. I actually sold that in 2020, I believe, or 2021. Those dates always kind of confuse me. They're just a big blur. But I had actually had I'm going to do quotation marks here, a drone business prior. I had started a video production company where I was providing video production services to platinum level artists, doing directing, working on TV shows, and ultimately found an opportunity to get into the commercial drone space by pure accident. I mean, it was literally just dropped onto my lap. A buddy of mine who, his best friend, right? It's the friend that knows a friend situation. They were looking for someone that could provide a better quality deliverable in terms of the marketing side for the commercial real estate properties that they were developing. In this case, it happened to be a distribution center that was actually about 30 minutes from where I lived here in Tampa, Florida. And ultimately what it came down to was finding some problems that, funny enough, I had seen some YouTube videos about doing drone photogrammetry or drone 3D modeling. Mm-hmm. And I pitched it to this company. I said, hey, I know you guys have this property that you guys are building right now. And a lot of your investors constantly want to know what's going on, but same to you guys. You guys also want to know what's going on the site. And rather than just taking a catalog of photos and videos and throw it into a Dropbox that's only going to get looked at once until, the next Dropbox links get sent over. Let's build you a living, breathing model. And so I asked them, I said, have you guys ever seen a drone scan before? They said, no, never seen this before. I went and got my trial of drone deploy, funny enough, and scanned my parents' house about 18 times. I say anywhere from 15 to 18 times. It was a lot. I scanned my parents' house a lot just to make sure I got it down. Went to the client's property the next day, did the scan, got everything processed, and then went into their office at the end of the week, did a full presentation. By the end of the presentation, the entire office was in the boardroom with jaws on the floors, light bulbs going off. And right there is when I secured my first contract. It was like a $12,500 contract for this client, which I ended up actually saving them about $60,000. And I talk about this in one of my my second YouTube video that I ever produced, and showing people how you can actually make money with drones. Because that moment right there is what basically jump-started my entire career into the full commercial space, working with construction companies, architecture firms, engineering firms, surveyors, and providing this high-quality data. And that lasted about a year and 3 months. And during that year and 3 months, we caught the eye of this software company, which we did a full proof of concept for in doing digital twins of these properties. They had about 80,000 properties all over the US that they helped create these basically just blueprints of everything from every space in a shopping center to the entire shopping center as a whole. So the parking lot information, all of the MEP information, even serial numbers on HVAC units for the air conditioning on the sites. They're still using Google Maps for it. We ended up coming in with, I say we, because I had a business partner, came in and did a full proof of concept for them for a small grocery chain down here in Florida called Publix. It's a big grocery brand here in the Southeast. They loved it and ended up expanding so quickly that that company ended up offering to buy my business partner and I out, merge with them. We did that. I ran their drone division for about a year and 8 months. And their drone division is still running to this day. I actually talked with the guy who took over for me because I brought him in and wanted him to run the operations. And that was such an incredible moment there. But I also learned a lot about the industry and how little knowledge there is behind providing these kinds of deliverables. Mm-hmm. Because at my tenure there, for the year and 8 months that I was there, we had hired about 100 plus 1099 Part 107 contractors to collect all this data for us. Many of them, this was their first time ever doing something like this, and started finding some holes in the knowledge. Now, granted, I didn't expect them to know what they were doing because this is all relatively new at the time that I had started this like 6 years ago. And that's when I started doing the training, the education, but I built that privately, took those skills and created some very simple YouTube videos, and kind of the rest is history from there. At the end of my time at that company, I left to start the company that I run now called PilotByte, and have trained tens of thousands of people, individuals worldwide, not just here in the US, but globally, on how to actually not just understand what this technology is, but how it works and how to provide this as a service. And the one thing that I've learned for the last, I'd say 7 years since getting into the commercial side of the industry is that doesn't matter how much the technology advances. If you don't understand the fundamentals, you will never be able to grasp the more advanced and expert level knowledge that is needed to get these massive contracts that are worth 5, 6, and 7 figures. You're going to always start at the very bottom, but you're going to have to build your way up. And that's why I say it's not just about understanding how the technology works and what it is, but it's also that business side and building those relationships. And those two, if you have them hand in hand, you're just going to excel very well. And so, from those 7 years and being in the commercial side of it, selling a business and then running another division, leaving that to start up another company, it all comes back down to just that relationship building. Yes, I've got a lot of equipment here at my office that I get to play with all the time and work with companies all over the world, but everything still comes back down to those fundamentals of understanding how the tools work and the application side of it too.
Yeah, and also I think something you're really showcasing is the ability to, I was going to say compartmentalize, let's say package that knowledge and simply put, transfer it, share it, coordinate it. In fact, coordination is something a lot of around your proof of concepts you were implicitly bringing up that I think is kind of one of those overlooked aspects of the industry. One drone can do a lot of very cool things. You start to get dozens or hundreds coordinated in some way, shape, or form. And now we're suddenly talking about infrastructure. Now we're talking about businesses that other businesses might acquire just to have that feature. And actually, that was one of my immediate follow-up questions. You you mentioned the company in question, or rather, your company was acquired. Now, Publix, I think it was, has a drone division. What does that drone division do exactly?
It wasn't Publix that acquired us. The proof of concept was for my client, and their client was Publix. They got about 400 clients all over the U.S. that they work with. So realistically, any shopping center that anyone has been to in North America, I was part of the program, proof of concept program that I started up and then ran for a year and 8 months, that went out and did the captures on a yearly basis.
That makes a lot.
They're using a lot of that for mostly asset cataloging, because these assets cost a lot of money, and there's a lot of companies that are invested heavily into real estate. I mean, real estate is probably one of the number one industries in the world, and we all revolve around it in one way or another. And so it was more of just keeping track of the asset and making sure that it was up to date, being taken care of, and just made it a little bit more efficient for these property managers to manage these properties on a large scale.
One thing I want to ask you is what maybe the drone industry gets wrong about itself. I'm going to lead this question a bit because I think in many ways you've answered at least part of the question in my mind. You've talked about that proof of concept, and I think that is a perfect example of maybe the drone industry's core challenge. I've been with the Spexy team for a little while now. They've been in business since about 2017, 2018. And despite nearly a decade themselves, simply put, same challenge selling their services is not just finding people who need, say, temporal maps or drone imagery or any of the things you're explicitly selling, but people who have the problem that solves and they don't know how drones can solve it for them. And to be honest, this is why I see it as a drone industry problem itself. People aren't engaging with the drone industry to access drones. They are, A, having someone from the drone industry usually find them, and then B, they are unlocking, or rather getting the benefits that drones or drones as infrastructure can offer a lot of the time. Like, I think that's explicitly what your business did and why your business was acquired, and where I see a lot of opportunities for the industry coming from. But it sort of pivots you hire a photographer to take pictures of you. So the logic for most drone operators is, I need to get hired as a drone operator, whereas the reality is probably something more akin to, I need to get hired as a real estate photographer who uses drones. I need to close the protection gap in insurance using my drone. Things of that effect. Excuse me, Dylan, I've led this question too much. What do you think the drone industry gets wrong about itself right now?
I think a lot of people, if you look at the numbers, I think we're sitting around like 60% of and I'm going to talk here for the US, that are Part 107 operators consider themselves as a drone business. But that's so vague, right? It's a very vague statement to make. And that's where I see a lot of people get excited. Yes, I create these videos and talking about, how you can make decent money with as cheap as a drone as a Mini 3 or Mini 4 Pro from DJI and making a few $1,000s a month. But that's because I am solving a problem, or I highlighted a problem that people didn't necessarily know was a problem, and then helping them connect the dots to, hey, this is the solution. The drone just happens to be one of the tools that I use for that solution. And it's a very exciting industry to be part of. Ooh, drones, things that fly, cool cameras, LiDAR, thermal, multispectral, right? But if you're not solving a problem, you just have a very expensive, nice looking tool that collects dust, in your garage or in your office. And to the point that you were talking about, right? Spexy's been around since 2016, 2017. And even, me being in this space for, as long, it always comes back to that effective communication with what that end client is. And the more broad you get, the much harder it is to stand out as a operator, as call them a solutions engineer, or solutions oriented, business. If you don't have a solution that you're solving, then, it goes back down to what I just said. You just have this expensive tool that's going to sit and collect dust. And so what I try and teach as best as I can is, or at least inspire people, is, look, you can use these tools in many different forms and applications and environments. You're going to get different outputs. It still may be the same fundamental technology and workflows that are being leveraged in several different industries. But the problem that's being solved is helping a client either be a lot safer, right, with the inspection side of things, saving millions of dollars if you look at something like the oil and gas industry, where they're able to do methane detection leaks on the right-of-ways. Like we're talking about real problems that these companies have been facing for whether it's a few years, whether it's a decade, whether it's a century, right? There's so many different applications with automation, and we just happen to have a tool that flies and can put itself in many different environments and in many different situations, more cost effective, cheaper, and you don't even have to use a human half the time nowadays with some of the applications that exist for it.
Again, when you were bringing up the proof of concept, it actually is a funny part of how Spexy has one of its longest term clients right now. Alec Wilson, the COO, is one of the first proof of concepts actually for the photogrammetry we were talking about earlier. Basically mapped his house a bunch of times, shared it with a client, gave the client the rights to that asset. To make a long story short, very notable client. I'm not sure I'm going to dox Alec right now, because if you go to their about page, you will see that beautiful imagery of Alec's house right next to the local park. And we've been working with that client for years now. But also, it's a perfect example of that was the proof. Like Alec proved it could work to the point where it is literally the crown jewel of that company now explaining what they do now. They've pivoted into a form of spatial AI right now. But I digress. I just wanted to bring up how big or small, individual or company, that proof of concept, finding it, and then also selling it, to put it simply, it's kind of everything. On that note, is there a use or application that you think is massively underrated, something the industry or other pilots aren't paying attention to that goes overlooked?
I'm going to answer this in a different way. Most people, when they get started into this industry, get pushed towards the real estate marketing and video shoots and getting thrown into, not to call you guys out, but, towards a Spexy or a Fly Guys or a ZitView, right? And then they were like, oh, well, maybe I can make more money doing this myself. And absolutely you can, but they get stuck into this mentality of this industry is extremely saturated. It's going to be saturated if you have 10,000 people fishing in a little tiny pond.
Yeah.
But as soon as you go out into the ocean, right, you're going to notice that there is a vast amount of area that you can cover. You can also just get yourself lost in driving yourself in a circle and trying to chase, many different opportunities at the same time. Where I find the most success in this industry is for those that find a specific niche, right? Something that is so unique that, again, using the drone as just the tool, the flying tool, and applying it towards an industry that has traditionally leveraged X, Y, and Z tools, and you're just bringing this new variant of a tool into it, you're going to find that there's a lot less friction in their spaces. Now, what I will say is part of that proof of concept is you're going to have to work with those clients. In order to work with those clients, you got to build that relationship. So you kind of see how those dominoes will fall into effect, but it takes a lot of patience to do that. That's not just something that's going to happen overnight. I mean, it never will. Maybe once in a blue moon, you may have something that just aligns so well and nobody's ever done it. But guess what? You just struck gold. And you need to take that opportunity and move it forward. But for the vast majority of individuals that get into this space, go to the Spexies, go to these other platforms that give you an opportunity to learn, get paid on the job, right? You're getting paid to learn how to leverage these tools and, what these different outputs can do. And there is nothing wrong with even staying with that, indefinitely. I've got individuals in this space that I've collaborated with that are still flying for these third-party aggregators, but they've also ventured off into some of their own niches and provide that as a solution to their specific clients. So kind of the bottom line is it's never too late to get into this space. Yes, it is saturated, but it's going to be saturated if you look in the same place that everybody's going to look into. It's okay to look there because you may get a few fish out of that pond, but don't expect there to be a big Goliath grouper that it's sitting at the bottom that you can reel up every single time, because that's just not the reality of it. You're going to find more of that reality if you compete in spaces that individuals or others in the space have not gone into yet, but it's not going to be easy.
It's good answer. Way to pivot with an impossible question to give an actual answer of value. Niches to riches cannot be denied. And I think you can literally look at Spexy and the Lair Drone Network and see the live data and see the areas where there are a lot of people fishing in the same spot, where a mission goes up and within minutes or hours. It's flown for the easy 10 to 20 USDC or whatever. And we're seeing it right now, just right this second in Hawaii. Actually, it's a perfect example of there are some pilots there and they are flying, but A, it's related to disaster recovery. So relatively shallow pond of pilots who can help. And B, and more notably, there are multiple islands in Hawaii. So while we have coverage for about 60% of them up front, we need to find somebody for that other island. And as a result, it's the difference between a mission being put up for 10 USDC and this one, which will probably have a big $500 USDC completion bonus split between whoever flies it as pilots. Just trying to provide a literal supply and demand example of, if you're all in the same pond and there's a bunch of other people fishing there, it's going to get shallower and shallower the more people that come in. But as you said, and I think you said extremely well, it's not just a matter of where you're fishing, but how you're fishing, what you're fishing for. I know somebody who had a government contract to basically film their reforesting using his drone. So we got to go through a lot of cool national parks, and they basically just took a 3-week trip to Europe to do this. Very cool. But then they also did some very interesting drone photography of DJs in rural environments, and they ended up selling their footage to the government as intended. But then they also used the B-roll from that footage to create these big 2-hour long DJ sets where it looked like the DJ was performing in a forest. Anyways, it's just a perfect example of taking what you've done and finding a unique angle on it or repackaging it as a drone operator. And the idea of engaging DJs is not something I would ever recommend to a drone operator up front. I don't see the immediate application of those services, but my man found a niche, and it's one I hadn't really considered. And it was that perfect blend of environmentalism and I guess European DJs that they found. And that was pretty much their year, was making those kind of videos using their drones. Just map a forest, get real up and close with a DJ on a mountain. It was very interesting. But let's talk about something perhaps a little bit more relatable. You've got all this experience and expertise, and I should also note we're approaching the end of the time I actually had you scheduled for. So, hardest question, what's the hardest part of this job, either for you or just doesn't get talked about?
I would say for me, a lot of people in this industry assume that I just get jobs as easy or easier than they would. And it's not the full truth. Yes, I can get jobs a little bit easier, but I still have to work for it. I still have to prove my value to the company. I have to prove that what I'm charging is, market rates, because I also don't want to be the person that drives it down. And that's actually one fearful thing that a lot of people reach out to me about is, I don't want to drive the rates down. I don't want to, cause chaos in the market. But, we all start from somewhere. And, I'm able to demand the rates that I demand, but I also take on way less jobs than most people because I don't need to. But do I want to take on more jobs? Yes. But I still have to work and build those relationships with clients. I've got clients that I've had relationships for 7+ years, even before I got into this space. And it's maybe once every 18 months that something hits, but it's big. Where for the meantime, most of my projects that I'm doing are very small jobs, that can take a day to 3 days to do. And, it's that assumption of, I'm a social media influencer that I get all these things. And yes, there's perks to the job. It is a job though. This is not just a hobby for me, but it's because I want to be able to get the latest and greatest technology in my hands. That way I can understand it. I can understand the applications of it. And then I can teach those how to effectively use it. Because kind of going back a little bit, one of the earlier questions you asked is, what's a big mistake, or maybe a mistake that most people don't know that they're making, and part of building those relationships. The other side of that is the tools that people invest into. And I've had students that have spent $50,000, $100,000 US on equipment, have no idea how to use it, and then don't have any funding or funds to pay for any of the training for it. Whether it's through me or through another company, they've just invested all of this money into equipment and expect, okay, well, I've spent $50,000, so, I'm not going to get out of bed for $2,500 a day. They're going to be the richest person in wherever they're at. That's just not how that works. And it's not how it works for me either. So, it's it's why I do the education side of it. I didn't know that was my calling. Somehow I figured out that I was pretty good at this. And, I continue to do this because I love this industry so much. And I think we're still at such an infancy stage. We were in a crawling stage. I think we're at a walking stage at this point now. I think the markets are going to be changing here again in 2027. I feel like we're in a rebuild stage right now. And that's not just in the US. I think that's globally. We're in a rebuild stage for, what the industries are going to look like. I think it more so has to do in part with all this AI that's going on. Mm-hmm. But, even though you have these markets that have nothing to do with this industry, like that's why I always say, find a niche, find an area that you can excel in, whether that takes a month or a year to get into that space. Stick with it, continue to push forward, continue to educate yourself. Don't be afraid to, put yourself out there and just try things because you never know what's actually going to work. There's some projects that I've done. I was like, I had no idea that the drone was going to be able to provide that kind of data to this client. And yet, they see tremendous value out of it. So kind of sum all this back up to the original question is, yes, it may seem saturated in areas. I still struggle sometimes to maintain, these relationships and build relationships. Things don't just come easy for me. And I think, those that kind of stick through with it are also going to understand. And, a lot of my colleagues in the space will more than validate that statement too.
Absolutely. To provide a little color on what you said around AI potentially driving demand. Fun thing about drones, they get about 30 times the resolution of planes or satellites, which for AI that needs to navigate a physical space is kind of everything. It also probably helps they're a little bit closer to the Earth, and thus any 3D imagery produced as a result of them, a lot more accurate. But Dylan, one last thing I want to say to you is something around what you were just saying, the hardest part, the people having the expectation that you just kind of have work fall to you. One part I would point out is we talked a lot about how as a drone operator, really any sort of freelancer, but particularly as a drone operator, you need to sell your services. You need to prove your concept to somebody who isn't familiar with it yet. And what you're doing with your YouTube channel, and it's something anyone can do, you've just managed to succeed with, let's say, 12 years of experience backing you up, but you're providing proof. You have 130,000 plus followers, and that's social proof. You have almost 100 videos explaining the minutia of drone operations in a way that's clear. And that is a form of proof. And likewise, many of those videos are almost case studies for why people should hire you. And that's not to say that you're lying, the jobs just come to you, but that is to say, like everything you've been talking about, prove the concept, sell your services in a unique way. You're also giving yourself a lot of stepping stones and repeatable processes, let's simply say, so that every time you are approaching a client, or even any time a client is potentially approaching you, they're qualifying themselves, they're qualifying you, and they're doing so in a way where you don't have to start from zero at the very least. And that, I also want to be clear, is work you've done. It's kind of the same way I was bringing up that drone pilot who managed to take forest imagery and find another use for it. You're taking your skills, your expertise, the education you provide, and in many ways, you are repackaging it as a way to help you find more of all of the above. And I think that is one of the biggest lessons I'm personally going to take away from you, and functionally what I'm kind of trying to do with this podcast. I don't think anyone's going to hire me as a drone operator once they listen to this and realize how ignorant I am of certain things, but you can see the logic here. Dylan, thank you so much for your time today. I have taken you well past how long I promised I would. I'm going to include all these links in the show notes, but where can people check you out and go to learn more?
Easiest place is on YouTube. Just search Dylan Gorman. I should be one of the first options that pop up there. And then in terms of all my training and education, my platform is PilotByte, spelled BYTE. You can find just about everything on there for the professional training, both online and actually here in person. I am the trainer here that will walk you through everything hands-on. But those are really the two best platforms to find me on, whether it's on YouTube or my own personal platform.
Absolutely. I'll include links to both those in the show notes. Once again, that's Dylan Gorman on YouTube, Gorman, and PilotByte, spelled BYTE.com. Thank you again, Dylan. You were a consummate guest, and I really, really enjoyed our conversation.
Awesome. No, I appreciate your time too. Thank you.
Thanks for being a part of the Drone Network. Subscribe wherever fine podcasts are served to get a new episode every week. And remember to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. It helps a lot. Today's show was sponsored by Spexy Geospatial and LairDrone. Learn more about standardized drone imagery built for global scale at spexy.com, that's SPEXI.com, and lairdrone.org. Thanks again for listening.